This which can affect the achievement of the organization's objectives. So that is the first step. Step one is to identify the risk. Every risk that could affect the achievement of the organization's objectives must be considered. When you see, this is again like you are talking about significant risk. Anything can happen to anybody, right? Are you not affected by like one meteor, say one rocket falling down? Yes, but then is that something which you really expect as such? So is that something you need to be prepared? Very rarely, right? Uh, Interest rate, foreign exchange risk. Is everybody? I mean, you and me actually have to pay uh, the institute, IMA institute fees, which can be adversely affected by the foreign exchange, right? But is that significant component in our the whole expense pattern? No. So only which are really significant, those risks only should be identified as risks to be managed. Not that every possible. Actually, when you go into risk management, you will really appreciate what I said. Any word add a risk, that is a risk. You can have a pillow risk when you talk about sleeping. You can have a mattress risk like when you sleep. But that it's so wide actually. Like pillow risk is so much actually. You can have an orthopedic pillow. This thing. I'm just telling you that this just come in front of me. That is why I said. So any word, anything plus risk is a risk. But then is that significant? Is that critical to your achievement? You need to really think and identify those risks which would have a significant impact to the achievement of your achievements. That's the first step. Right? That's the first step. Is there any quantitative technique involved in it? Very rarely. How do the entities identify risk? From now onwards, I may sound, if you really go into the textbook, that I may sound that I am talking so much outside the textbook, but all what I am going to talk now are there, but not necessarily. I mean, are there means are there in the claim outline, but not necessarily at this point, at this place. It might be there after this section in the course of framework. So I'll be covering all the related portion so that I will cover the whole risk management in 3 days class, including today. Okay, just listen to me. I am not just saying blah blah. I am talking about things which are covered in your textbook and which are important for your examination. So step one is to identify the risk. It's a 5-step process they are talking about. Step one is to identify the risk. It's essentially a qualitative what do you say, aspect, right? There are very less quantitative techniques involved in identifying risk. How do organizations identify risk? Probably they can have all the managers sitting together and brainstorm it, like what are the risks facing us. So brainstorming is one tool they can have to identify risk. Another way to identify risk, like somebody can go interview the managers concerned and ask, like, what keep you awake at night? What are you concerned with? What are you worried about? So note down that. So I'm worried that the reconciliations are not being done, and then there may be a huge, there may be some surprises, huge surprises there in that. So he's worried about operational risk. So we have so much to collect, and if the currency falls, currency exchange rate falls, then there may be a huge loss. Or we have so much payable, if the exchange rate goes up, then we have a big loss. So then you are really worried about FX risk. So you can identify risk by asking the questions like what keep you awake at night to the concerned managers. That That is another way to find, to really list the risk facing the organization, identifying the risk facing the organization. Another common way which is employed by the entities is actually like, they, I've named some risk, like interest rate risk, foreign exchange risk, commodity risk, like that. It's only like some few. Actually, you have many other risks. You list down all those generic risks, generic risks. So you go ask, you give an inventory of generic risks, right? You prepare an inventory of generic risks, distribute that among your managers, and ask them to tick off what you think can significantly affect. Not all that risk will have a remote chance of affecting. If that is the case, the whole thing can. No, what can have significant impact? Just think that. So that is one way to identify this. Yeah, foreign exchange. Yeah, we don't have much foreign receivable or foreign payable. That's not applicable for us. Reputation risk. No, we are not worried about reputation as such. Legal risk. No, this is okay actually. Like GST is getting stable thing. Um, then yeah, that is something actually. Our reconciliations are not being done. All those things like, so they can identify what is relevant to them and what is not relevant. So I have named some 3 ways to identify risk. What are the ways I have named? Brainstorm. Then 2, interviewing the people, right? And asking them what keep them awake. 3, give them a list of generic risk items and then ask them to identify which risks are relevant to them. So these are all ways to identify. So now you understand that in step 1, there's hardly any quantitative technique. Okay. Next step is assessing risk, right? But before I go into assessing risk, give me half a minute break. I'll come back. Okay, let me continue. So the first step in risk management process is to identify risk. Once you identify, you have to assess. You have to quantify that risk, right? There is a way to quantify that risk. You can really assess risk as a product of the potential impact or the severity of that risk and the frequency or the probability of that risk, the likelihood of its happening. So risk can be quantified as a function of or a product of the impact, the monetary impact, and the probability, the likelihood. So this is purely mathematical, but then when it comes to, so you can really see there is some quantitative techniques involved. There are mathematical expectations. When you see the impact into probability, that is what is called mathematical expectation. That is what is called average. When you see statistics, you will really see that that is nothing but arithmetic. So you have that quantitative, but even there, not all assessments need to be made in quantitative terms. High risk, medium risk, low risk, like that. You can, even after quantifying also, ultimately you are bucketing them into the qualitative buckets: high risk, medium risk, low risk. So you can really see that this step involves many quantitative techniques, right? The risk itself is quantified as a product of, as the probability weighted impact. So it's a product of the severity or the severity of impact and the likelihood of its happening. And even after that also, for you can really quantify them as, and then ultimately bucket them as high risk, medium risk, and low risk, like that. So, but again, you have some quantitative techniques involved. I mean, this is like one simple way of looking at it. But when you assess the impact of risk, like you have various tools like benchmarking. Like when you really see, what is benchmarking? It is actually like comparing with standards. But this is a very, it can be like benchmarking is there as a qualitative technique and a quantitative technique. It will be comparing with the best practices also, you call it benchmarking. But then in the modern statistics, the quantitative analysis benchmarking is very sophisticated quantitative techniques, like how the returns of your portfolio behave in line with the benchmark. That is also benchmarking, like your stock, your stock versus S&P index. That is benchmarking. That's a very sophisticated, the volatility of your stock versus the volatility of the S&P index or Dow Jones Industrial Average. So that is a very sophisticated quantitative technique. So in this step, definitely a mix of quantitative techniques and qualitative techniques you can see. But you should appreciate that not all assessments need to be made in quantitative terms. Some could be like qualitative terms like high, medium, low are often useful. Let me introduce you to this concept, risk as a product of the impact and probability, right? So there is an illustration here. I will just read that. A company is assessing the risk of its systems being penetrated by hackers. So there is information system security risk. When you have a system, say that you are having a credit card system, every day, not every day, every hour also I cannot say, every now and then you will have some hackers trying to penetrate into the system. That's quite common, right? The minor penetrations, like my attempts to penetrate into your systems, are very common. So there is a 95% likelihood, 95% likelihood you can really attach that 95% in many ways actually. Like say for example, one way to really come to this likelihood or the probability is to really list down say past 4 years, how many such attempts were there. So that is an estimate of the probability. Say that in the past 1,000 days, 950 days you had some minor penetration or other. That's the meaning of this likelihood. I mean, that is one way to arrive at this likelihood, right? And probably you can attach this by your experience and gut feel that is there. But this is one way to do that. So you can really see that it is high likelihood, high probability, 95%. And when it comes, I'm just because I'm not really happy with this much big amount, so I'm just taking 1,000 away from this for my satisfaction. There's nothing that you see. So every time when there is a minor penetration, there can be a potential loss of $1,000. So it's an average loss. This average is there for quantification, but doesn't really mean anything. Some of the minor penetration may not cost you anything. Some of the minor penetration may cost you 2,000, but on an average, minor penetration, say $1,000 is the potential loss. If that is the case, what is the expected loss? 1,000 into 0.95, 950. Right? So that is the expected loss on that. But if you see, hackers succeed in getting into your systems, and then they are able to view the contents in your internal database. So the hackers succeed in getting into your systems and view the database. That's the real embarrassment, right? The credit card systems are hacked by the like hackers, and then they got into the system, and they are able to copy the database. So they know the credit card number, date of birth, social security number. That's a big embarrassment to the organization. Say that is $50,000 is the potential monetary loss. And then from the historical experience, you come to a likelihood at 35%. So a probability weighted monetary loss is 17,000. Right? And now that hacker succeeded not only in viewing your database, he is able to alter the database, means then probably the very existence of your organization may be in trouble. Right? He would have, in a spirit of vandalism, he would have destroyed the whole database, means then you cannot serve it. Or like getting into a university database and making the pass candidates fail and the fail candidate get ranks. All those things they can do it, actually that will be the end of that university. So that can be really costing 2 million or even 2 billion. But then what is the chance? The probability may be very less. Say 1% probability people may be able to do that by passing all types of control. Then 20,000, I mean here let me take for that case at least the number they have given, 20 million is the expected loss. Okay, now let me stick to one set of numbers, 950,000, 17.5 million. If this is the case, even though that is with 1%, even then on the mathematical average, when you see it, it is 20 million you need to really take too much care of, and you should really go up. You should never give a chance for that. Although that is only 1% chance, the probability weighted impact is too high that you cannot ignore that. So this is the way you quantify the loss. I mean, quantify the risk, the expected loss. So you need to really have systems in place to cover that kind of expected loss, right? So you need to really see that you are in a safe situation. So this is the way you assess. So you need to really quantify that, and then you need to assess that risk. Based on that, you have to prioritize it. That is the step 3. So you need to assess. This assessment will lead to correctly prioritizing it. Assessment is essentially quantitative, you can say, but then qualitative assessment also are there. But when it comes to prioritizing, it depends on so many aspects. It's not just purely based on the monetary level. Some are very urgent that you need to do now, so that has to be done now. Some will be there at the entity level that may be getting that should be getting more attention than the risk affecting one particular part of the organization. But then you cannot ignore the part of the organization also. But if that risk affecting a part of the organization can completely destroy that part, means actually then the organization cannot function. So risk at the entity level, risk at the operating unit level, everything you should be considering when you prioritize that. So that risk prioritization step onwards, you need a specialized committee comprising of all the affected departments and the operational functions involved in that step, prioritizing risk. So from here onwards, you will really see the real importance of risk committee. In modern organizations, something called risk committee is there. Normally, it is headed by the risk manager, risk officer. They call it risk officer. See, normally we say manager, officer, below manager, but when it comes to this kind of organization structure, the word we use is risk officer. Risk officer means chief risk officer. So it should be headed by risk officer, chief risk officer. And then, of course, in the risk committee, there should be representatives from all the operational areas. Right? Representatives means either the general manager or somebody who can represent the general manager, because take so many decisions in that risk committee. What is really affecting? Probably like you are talking about developing a customer relation management system based on a request from your call center manager, but then that need changes in the sales systems and accounting systems everywhere. So in the interconnected businesses, there should be representatives from each of these operational areas and functions. Then only risk committee can prioritize, right, what should be done first, right? So ERM committee is necessary to view risk identified by various operating units and create a coherent response plan. A coherent response plan means a plan which is really sustainable and taking care of all the aspects, interrelated aspects. So you need to like prioritize risk from an organizational point of view. So the ERM is really necessary manifested through a risk committee there. So in large and complex organizations, top management may appoint an ERM committee to review the risk identified by various operating units and create a coherent response plan. So that is the third step. What is the first step? Identify various risks. Second step, assess risk. Third step is to prioritize risk. Right? And once they prioritize risk, then the next step is to really formulate the risk responses. How to really respond to that risk. So you have to really formulate or select the appropriate risk response strategy. That is the first step. Right? Once you do that, you need to attach responsibility to each of the functions involved. So this committee's involvement is really needed in that process, that step also, because it should be really, I mean, the people from various functions will have to really discharge certain responsibilities regarding the chosen risk response. They should really develop that, they should design that risk, they should implement that risk, right? So this is also essentially done by the ERM. So they are proposing the adequate risk response, right? At what level it should be managed also, it is decided by the risk committee, right? Then fifth step is to monitor the risk response. Like when you monitor like how it is happening on the shop floor, that is what you are really trying to say. So the two main sources of information you will have in the monitoring stage are from one, the operational management, which is close to what is happening, right? They are having the proximity to the issue on hand. So the operational management is one good source of information when you talk about monitoring the risk response, because they are close to that issue. They know whether that risk response, what you had formulated, is not at all like relevant. Once they implement, they know it. So the necessary corrections can be done by the risk committee. So risk committee should know whether what they have formulated as risk response is appropriate when they get information from the operational management. So operational management is really a good source of information in monitoring risk response. But what happens is actually, when you formulate the risk response, mostly the suggestions are coming from the operational risk management, right? So they will have a problem in objectively assessing the performance of objectively monitoring the performance of the risk response. So in addition to them, you need to have a good audit function. The auditors are independent. They are not involved in formulating the risk response or designing the risk response. They are not a part of the team implementing the risk response. They will be objectively and independently viewing and monitoring the risk response. So the two main sources of information for ongoing assessment of the adequacy of the risk responses are the people who are closest to the activities themselves, namely the operational management. The other function is the audit function, especially because the operational managers have a stake in designing a particular risk response strategy. Analyzing risks and responses are among the normal duties of internal auditors. So internal auditors and the operational management are the two main sources for getting the information about monitoring the risk, monitoring risk response. So you understand the 5 steps. Now I will go in detail about various risk response strategies normally an organization can have. So here it's like you are identifying risk, you are assessing risk, you are prioritizing risk, right? Based on that, you are formulating this response, you design and you implement that risk response, and you keep monitoring that risk response, the effectiveness of that, in containing or controlling that risk, right? So there, you have to really see what are the risk response. So I'm just going in detail about the step 4. So you understood the 5 steps. Identify the risk involved, the significant risk. Second, assess the risk. Third, prioritize risk. Fourth, formulating this response. In these 2 steps, the ERM committee is very important. Then monitoring risk. In monitoring risk, the operational management and audit function are good sources of information, right? You understand that. Now we are going in detail about the various risk response. Here, it's good to know about heat risk mapping. Risk mapping we call it, or heat risk mapping. It's actually going into a 2-dimension. In 1 dimension, you can really have the severity of impact, the monitoring impact. The other, you can have the probability, the frequency. I am supposed to draw a straight line here. This is a 2-dimensional graph I am just trying to have. And you can have the severity bands, low, medium, high, all that, or like up to certain monetary threshold. You can have like a 5x5 grid, or a 3x2 grid, or even a 10x5 grid, or like that. You can really have the bucketing of the frequency and the bucketing of severity. But for simplicity's sake, let me take only 2 bucketing. Say it is high, it is low. I don't know, somehow I put low, high, low. You can even put low, high, doesn't matter. This is also low, high. So I am really having a 2x2 matrix. I have right 4 cells. See, I have classified the frequency or the probability into high frequency and low frequency. I can have like purely mathematical frequency level. There is no problem with that. It's really good to see that kind of risk mapping. I think in your textbook there is a heat risk mapping. I will show you that, I think, better. It's not there. Let me take the textbook and then come back to that. Yeah, it's there. Yeah. See, actually speaking, this should be a color coded. Actually, here you will have very warm colors and very cool colors here as such, like red and the very dark red coming here, and then it comes to orange, yellow, then when it comes here it is green, bright green, like that. Then you will really see the severity of impact and the likelihood of its happening. This is like a 4x4 matrix, right? Green, okay, we are color coding it also, although there is no color here. This is green, this is orange, this is dark orange, this is red, like that. So you can really feel the danger when it comes to this cell, right? So this is what is called heat risk mapping or risk mapping. So it is essentially plotting the impact versus the likelihood, the impact versus the expectation versus the monetary impact versus the probability. So let's get into that. So I had just chosen only high and low, just to explain what could be the appropriate risk response based on the heat risk mapping or risk mapping. Let me ask you, when there's something high risk, high monetary impact, and very high probability, what could be your appropriate risk response? Sami, can you just say? Say, for example, you wanted to have a rent-a-car business along the length and breadth of the country, India. And then when it comes to Jammu and Kashmir, you know that there is so much terrorist attack. Once there is a terrorist attack, they will fire your fleet of cars and all your cars will be lost. When fire breaks up means then it's total loss. And what is the frequency? Every now and then, every week, you can potentially have a terrorist attack. So it is high frequency and high severity. What should you do? What's the appropriate risk response strategy? Sean? Praveen, any idea what would be the...
To be insured?
Then the insurance company will really charge you high premium for that. It is not effective. Anyway, Kevin has come up with an answer for that. The best strategy could be to avoid. So avoidance strategy. Don't have the rent-a-car business in Jammu and Kashmir. You have the rest of the country. Don't do the business there. That could be the best strategy. I mean, at least for some people, they may see that this is the best strategy. There's nothing wrong in what I've done. This is like a picture which I'm just reproducing from your textbook. But if I want the color coding in the same way they have done it here in that mapping, let me change this 1 minute. Because I just wanted you to really appreciate the heat risk mapping with that color coding. That is it. Just changing it. Of course, what I have drawn is the sheet which they are having in that initial discussion. You can have it in your textbook. You can really see that on page 328, the same thing. But now I'm just changing it to reflect that heat risk mapping. So it is low, it is high. So we were discussing about high severity and high frequency, right? High severity, an appropriate risk strategy could be to, risk response strategy could be to avoid that, risk avoidance. So risk avoidance is abstaining from doing it, avoiding that risk altogether. So you understood one risk response strategy, risk avoidance, not doing that business. Right? If you feel that it is too high severity and too high frequency, that could be the best strategy in that situation. But if you see that the severity is high, right, and the frequency is low, what could be the appropriate strategy here? Like say for example, a fire. If it breaks out, then the severity is high. It can destruct the whole premises. But then what is the chance that a fire of that sort really occur? Very low frequency. So what can you do in such a situation? Anybody can give any appropriate response? Yeah, insurance. So what is insurance? Insurance is a type of risk transfer. You are transferring that risk to an insurance company in exchange for a premium. That is what is called insurance. That's essentially a risk transfer, right? So risk transfer, insurance is risk transfer. You are transferring your risk to an insurance company. You are the insured, right? The insurance company is the insurer, right? So you are actually paying a premium to transfer the risk from you to the insured to the insurer. That is the insurance policy, right? So no doubt it is a transfer. But actually speaking, like certain religious people don't like this risk transfer. Your risk should not be transferred to another person. Islam religion, they say that your risk should not be transferred to another person. So this view of insurance is haram in Islamic finance. But then you have, like say for example, some 100 farmers joining together in a village. They are all making a livelihood from these cattle, right? It is sure that one or two farmers will face with the loss of the cattle every year. Whether it could be X or Y, it's not known. But every year, some 2 or 3 farmers will lose their cattle. Once a fellow human or a fellow merchant or fellow farmer is faced with such kind of misfortune, it is the responsibility of the other farmers to share in that misfortune. That is there in all the religions, right? So once it happens, the other farmers can contribute some money and then help the affected farmer to buy that cattle. They can do that before the cattle die also, so that they can avoid the delay. So that way is allowed in Alamiya insurance. So that is nothing but the same thing, but then the view, the perception, the idea is not risk transfer, idea is risk sharing. So now you understood. So my time is coming up. I will stop in 10 minutes time because I have a class at 9 o'clock. So you have synonyms for the same thing: insurance, risk transfer, and risk sharing. All these are same thing, which is appropriate when the severity is high and the frequency is low. Somebody was telling me, when high, if you go for insurance, then the insurance company will charge you so high that this is not practically possible. But when there is a low frequency, low probability and high severity insurance, you can go for insurance. And the insurance, that is very one special way of doing that risk transfer. There are so many other ways to do the risk transfer, right? Essentially, if you're worried about the price decline in one asset, You go for hedging. That is a risk transfer. That is a risk sharing also. Because see, if you have an asset which you are having a long position in that asset, right? And what are you worried when you are having a long position? When you are having a long position in that asset, you are worried about the price decline in that asset. So what should you do? You should go for a short hedge. You should buy one instrument, or you should get into an instrument, or you should be exposed to an instrument which will gain in its value when there is a drop in the value of the asset you are holding. So hedging, but if there is no change, what will happen? You will lose the premium you are paying. So it is actually a risk sharing between you and the person who is giving you the hedging instrument, right? But if you feel that your premium what you're paying is so low, then you may call it a risk transfer. So it is like how much impact you can withstand. All those trade-offs can really make you think whether it is risk transfer or risk sharing. So insurance is one way to do it. Another way to do is hedging. So these are all tools to do risk transfer or risk sharing. But anyway, these normally are used as synonyms, right? So you got that. Now let us take when there is a low severity and low frequency. What should you do? It rarely happens, and when it happens also, it's not having so much impact. So what should you do? What is the appropriate response strategy? Somebody can name it? Sami, you are there actually. You can unmute and talk.
Confuse exploitation or retention.
No, exploitation is totally different. I will explain you what is exploitation. This is retention. Retention. Another word is actually accepting that risk and retaining it. So risk acceptance, risk retention. You don't do anything. You just accept it as a part of doing your business. Right? Probably like quantifying it, you can increase the pricing accordingly to cover that expense. It's like, okay, you can even take it away to do the business, and then you can even go for a self-insurance for that. Like self-insurance means what? You will be charging a particular, a particular level of expense for this, and you will earmark certain funds probably for that, or you will accept that as an expense of doing the business. So that premium, although you're not paying to an insurance company, you will be accumulating that, and then you will feel that, okay, I have enough resources to meet that. So risk acceptance, risk retention, self-insurance are the appropriate strategies here. Now the bulk of things come when it is very high frequency and low impact. Low but significant. So what should you do? All your risk mitigation, risk reduction, risk mitigation, risk reduction strategies, all your internal controls, everything is in this quadrant. All internal control activities what you are having are in this quadrant. So you have high frequency, so you need to have, like say for example, the cash should be kept under lock and key, right? If it is not so, then people might steal. So even if you are keeping it in a lock and key, somebody still may misappropriate it or steal it. So you should have daily physical verification, security. All those things are the internal controls associated with that. So the control activities, everything is highly geared towards this quadrant. Risk mitigation, risk reduction are the appropriate risk response strategy here. Now Sami was introducing another risk response strategy, that is risk exploitation. That is also a possibility, but not in this as such. See, like risk and reward go together, you know that. The higher the risk, the higher the reward. That's a fact. So if you are in the pursuit of getting higher reward, you can really take a more risk. That is what is that risk exploitation or risk seeking strategies are a deliberate courting of risk in expectation of a higher reward. Say you know that a private equity, you can have 300% return, but then a high risk like 95% of the private equity is fail, or 90% of the private equity is fail. So in expectation of the 300%, you may even lose your principal. But then if you really bet on this, you can go for that. It need not be a suicidal strategy. It can be a very effective strategy provided you know your risk appetite. Based on your risk appetite, if you can really go for, say, you have 1 crore wealth, it is possible. You can earmark, say, out of that 10 lakh rupees, 1 crore you have, right? Out of that 10%, 10 lakh rupees, you can earmark for private equity. If it is lost, 10% of your worth is gone. But if you are getting it, 300%, you are getting it. So this is what is called risk exploitation. So it is a deliberate courting of risk in anticipation of higher reward. It is not suicidal provided you know your risk appetite and you are only earmarking only that much towards it. So that is another risk response strategy. So let us just go through this. I am not really going to recap because I don't have time for it. I'm just seeing whether I have covered all the risk response strategies which are named in this study unit. Risk avoidance I explained, risk retention I explained, risk reduction I explained, risk rearing I explained, risk exploitation also I have explained. Now I have introduced the word called risk appetite, right? I will explain you what it is, and then you have some risk, and then you will go for some kind of risk response. Before you implement any risk response, the risk you have is called inherent risk. What is remaining after the risk response is what you call it as residual risk. So we will take this discussion further to develop a risk profile for a selector strategy, and then we will continue tomorrow. Not tomorrow, the next class. See you then. Have a good day.